let's start. Here we are, 4020 not live, in various locations by the magic of the internet. Phil Kaplan is here and John Davidson live from remote locations. And Brian McDermott, because, we might as well talk about what's going to happen next because no one knows. But Brian McDermott saying we should play 60-minute games in 4 quarters and this, that and the other. And he told it exclusively to everyone, including 4020 last week, Phil.
Yeah, I think it's partly an antidote to what Gary Hetherington said about player welfare needs to come at the bottom of the list because we're going to have to play economically to make up the shortfall. And I think knowing Brian a little bit, that would have perturbed him that we dispense with player welfare, which seems odd at a time when we've all noted that the second fixture at Easter needed to go on the basis of player welfare. And we brought in head injury assessments and all the other things that we think are responsible for a full contact sport to do. So I think Brian was, as he often does and doesn't perhaps get credit for, thinks outside of the box and said, well, if we do have to play these extra games, and I can see the economic reason and logic to do that, why don't we just change the sport a little bit? Because I suppose the one thing we probably need to talk about, and John would be the expert on the latest situation in Australia, which is sounding a little bit more positive as regards likely restart dates, is do we look at this season as a complete one-off and say, let's try everything we can to get a season played, and then we just go back to being predominantly what we were for 2021? Or do we just say, whatever we do this year, it's blank sheet of paper time, and let's actually live up to our branding of being an innovative sport, in which case Brian's suggestion of playing 4 15-minute quarters is not as daft as it sounds.
John, I'm reading your Patreon, and I'm excited by this another new format in which we play games which have no meaning on them whatsoever.
Just games for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Rugby League Hub.com, long reads on Patreon. There's a good plug there. That was Jack Howson, the Dewsbury assistant coach and former Sheffield Eagles captain. His idea was, I think, sort of along the lines of the Brian McDermott idea of, exhibition games and a different pool system. Obviously, a nines weekend and bringing back sort of I guess not a captain's challenge, but sort of a different format where you, instead of sort of the stayed league season and league structure that we have now, and also bring back an origin sort of element. And obviously that's just an idea, but I think it's definitely, going on what Phil said, I think, and what Brian McDermott, it's definitely a chance to experiment now, because I just can't see how we can play all the games that we were supposed to play with what's happened.
We've got no idea when. Normal's not the word, because there's going to be no normal after this.
The new normal.
When we're going to be back playing, and in what sense that will be. I don't see a problem with 60-minute, 15-minute quarters. People have got upset because it's not 80 minutes, as if that really matters in this day and age. I think we all just want to see some live rugby involving people from this era.
I think the other point that Brian was making was that as a sport, we actually have been through some of this before, that there's been periods in our history where we have changed. Whether it be the number of players on the field, because we were originally 15 with rugby union, whether it was going down to 12 during World Wars, because that's all we could get on the field. There has consistently been an element of let's try something. And almost, as well as preserving the health of the players, which has to be a priority in all of this, you get almost a benefit for the television companies, because they're going to have to recoup some of their revenue pretty quickly that they've lost, and the more advertising they can get on during a live event, the better. So it might work for them. And I think the other thing that he was wanting to stress was that we need to attract a new audience, and that's one of the things that Robert Elston and the City Talking who he employed and all the the speeches have been about breaking the bubble. I think John's consistently written pieces about how do you actually do that. But one of the things we need to look at is a slightly different format that appeals to a younger audience. And it could well be that reducing the time on the field, which increases the intensity of what you're watching, is an appeal to a new generation. And maybe that's something that shouldn't be off the table at the moment either.
We've got the excitement at the weekend. Now, there's no sport on TV, so people watch the Virtual Grand National. 4.8 million people watched a computer-generated horse race, which is higher than a lot of horse racing gets week in, week out, especially the big events. I think they said something like the Derby gets 1.8 million viewers last year. So 3 million extra people watched the virtual horse race, which granted was hyped up and obviously money went to charity in that sense. So there is a desperation for content out there.
And I still couldn't pick a winner.
No, I didn't either. But at least nobody went to the NHS. That was good. I'd rather have gone to my pocket, though. But how can we should be here. We were the last sport standing, weren't we? We were the only sport on that last weekend before everything shut down, providing content for TalkSport. We had nothing else because we were there. Chris Kamara was there. Everyone was there at Saints and Castle at the Jungle. And now we've got to find a new way of providing content for all our broadcast partners coming up. And I don't know, John, as Phil's mentioned, in Australia, obviously they've got their financial pressures as well. We got that story yesterday that perhaps the New Zealand Warriors might not be able to complete the season. And I guess we might have similar problems over here with our non-domestic elements.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been following the situation in Australia every day, but it seems a little bit hysterical. And I think obviously the whole closed doors thing, they really pushed the envelope, and I think too much. And, I think Cameron Smith was probably the lone voice of, should we really be doing this? And yeah, obviously the financial constraints, well, not the constraints, but the money that they have to come up with is a lot greater because there's a lot more wastage as well, and the salary is a lot higher. So they've come up with everything from, islands off Queensland and somewhere in the bush, and it's just a lot of it is just pine. I think what was it? Was it Apollo 11, Phil, or Apollo 13? They've named it.
They've called it Project Apollo. Led by Wayne Pearce.
Well, I mean, anything Junior Pearce does is great. He's a good musician as well as was a good back rower back in the day. Which was the Apollo mission that blew up?
Was it 13?
That's one they made the film of, isn't it?
I can't remember.
No,
11.
That actually blew up.
Oh, you're thinking of the Challenger. You're thinking of the Challenger from the 80s.
I am, yeah. I'm not a NASA expert, but yeah, I think there is a little bit of I don't want to say selfishness, but there's a little bit of a lack of touch with reality. Obviously, everyone wants rugby league back wherever it is around the world, and everyone's missing it. But it is people's lives and health that we're talking about. There's got to be, some common sense, you would think.
I think for the last thing I saw from Peter V'landys, and we can probably discuss at some point leadership and who's come out of this on both sides of the world with any degree of not so much credit, but credibility. Are they saying things for the sake of saying them, or have they been genuine leaders through one of the biggest crises the sport's ever seen? But I think he's saying that the rate of increase of infection has significantly gone down in Australia to below a level when they were still playing. So to get all the teams together in one place, isolated and constantly tested on a daily basis, he reckons they could restart end of June, early July at the latest. So I think there's going to be a different starting time over here to over there. I don't think we're anywhere near seeing a reduction here. The other thing, just from a purely practical point of view, is every sport is going to be starting late. So it's all very well saying we need to have midweek games and we need to give Sky, thousands of matches in a very short space of time. Well, football will be saying that, and basketball will be saying that, and netball will be saying that. So we'll go from an absolute famine to a feast, and it'd be very interesting to see how rugby league fits into that. Are our fans going to accept that our midweek game is at 1:45 on a Tuesday, because that's the only time football isn't being played?
And that's it, Phil. And just on that point, I mean, I'm guessing you've probably lost income from your business. I know I have. I'm pretty sure Rich has, and most rugby league fans will have been the same. Who's going to be able to afford to go and see 3 games a week? Even your hardcore, nuts. They're not everyone's going to have the money that they had before to go, to a magic weekend in August or October or whatever. A lot of people will be cutting back on that kind of stuff.
And we're not particularly a sport which has expensive ticket prices, are we, compared to, say, Premier League? Except who appear to be the most important team that play at Dewsbury Stadium at the moment, judging by the change of leadership at the Bulls. But I guess that's another point for another day. There's something interesting, John, you mentioned on Twitter. I think it was last night, or it might be, no, it's this afternoon, in reply to Brian Moore, the former England Rugby Union forward, about how things are going to change. And we've got a structure at the moment of 3 quote-unquote professional divisions. And there's been questions before on this programme and elsewhere about whether we can necessarily afford to sustain that number of clubs or players. There's going to be some very difficult decisions made in the next few weeks and months about the future going forward for the world, let alone our sport. But there was something interesting you said, and this is the point that's going to stick in people's throats. I think it might have been actually Brian Moore who said this himself. Mediocre players getting paid to do a job that they might not necessarily be qualified to do, or such.
I didn't say anything about mediocre players, but I think I've thought this for a couple of years. There's not enough money to support 37. I think we're at 30. Well, there's 37, which will be 38 clubs, obviously, with Ottawa next year, to support that many clubs, or enough fans to go around. And you look at the average attendances of each club. It's just sort of a watering down. I mean, if you had 2 divisions or 1 division, you could funnel a lot of more money and players get paid a lot more in kind of a cream of the crop sort of situation. Now, I don't want to see any club go to the wall or go on and lose their history and heritage, but the game has to evolve. And at the moment, we've just sort of got a situation where we've been slung with this and this from 125 years, and we've tried to add new clubs in Canada and France and wherever else, and some have fallen over because there's no strategy or support from a head office, and others have sort of managed to survive. But it's kind of a weird setup that we have now. I just don't know. I don't want to say it's a race to the bottom, but I don't know how long that can kind of survive in the post-coronavirus climate as well.
Isn't there a wider question, and one that I think has been asked a lot, probably since we had franchising, that actually at all levels of the sport, we don't really know what we want and expect. We don't actually have standard criteria at each level the game is played to allow clubs to operate at that level which suits them best, both in terms of playing resource and economically. And this is an opportunity to look at that and do that. And it may well be that the age-old debate about the need and economic reality of promotion and relegation is something that actually goes to the very top of the agenda, rather than everybody goes, oh, we can't possibly talk about things like that because it's ingrained in the social habit of sport. Well, maybe for us it isn't. And maybe if you look at the history of the sport, whenever we've had promotion, relegation, the sport has never prospered. Are we at a time now where you don't have to follow other sports, that you create your own map and environment, and you look at the overall resource that you've got and how best to deploy that? And all of those questions are valid from here on in, because we're at a point where actually there's been a real levelling out. And in some respects, the bigger clubs with the greater resource stand to lose more at the moment. I don't know. I think that these are questions that strategists need to have. And whereas the NRL have brought in an 8-person innovations group headed up by Wayne Pearson, including people like Trent Robinson, who I think is somebody else we all believe is someone who, if he says this is the best way for the sport to go, we'd see him free of vested interest. Are we doing anything like that? Have we called, 8 of the top minds together to say, get us out of where we are at the moment, find a solution to claim the money that we're owed for the end of this season? But how do we go forward from here? What do we need? And I don't know if we have.
I think a think tank of Scully in his dressing gown will be able to do it.
At least he made it to the International Rugby League list of potential greatest centres of all time. So at least he's on that list. Which will
he didn't get the nod, though, unfortunately.
Oh, did he not?
No.
I've kind of given up on these online votes because they're all a bit of a waste of time anyway, because it's whoever's got the most supporters will be the greatest team ever or score the greatest try.
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
How did Clive Sullivan's World Cup winning try not make it onto the list of the top 5? I don't know. And
just on Phil's point, I think I definitely agree, but yeah, it doesn't seem to be the leadership or the visionary to kind of drive that kind of change. Well, it's definitely the time to be talking about it and thinking about it. Not to be cynical, but history and past experience seems to suggest that.
Well, you've both touched on leadership, and social media is a bubble. We know that not everyone's involved, but lots of people coming out in support of Her Majesty the Queen, because she was on the telly last night giving her address to the nation, which had pretty much been spoilt all day by Nicholas Witchell on the BBC and other broadcasters as well. But she came out there, she did a speech, she speaks well, she had a bit of practice. She speaks better than the Prime Minister, at least. We, in our sport, as we know, have got 2 leaders. One has been seemingly more visible than the other, and it seems that there's another point to come after this, but it seems that the stock of Ralph Rimmer, who has been a figure of fun at points because of his sartorial elegance, but now he appears to have become the leader we didn't know we need.
I wouldn't be a senior administrator in any sport at the moment for all of the resource that we've either got or haven't. I think they are absolutely on a hide into nothing. I also think that there is only Ralph that can talk about it, because if you are the government and you're going to deal with a governing body, then Super League is a marketing organisation. The RFL is the governing body. So Ralph has to take the lead. And I think to his credit, he has made the right noises at the right time. And has emerged from this probably with an enhanced reputation. It's clear that in the NRL, Todd Greenberg has probably been more statesmanlike, but clearly has had the ground from under him pulled, because he's going to be deemed to be the bloke who was in charge when a lot of money was wasted. I think Robert Elston has had to take a slight back seat. I think he can see some writing on the wall about if there is a lack of resource at all levels in the game, to over-duplicate it is completely nonsensical. So I think he will realise that there has to be some shake-up after this and cutting costs in-house. And I don't know anything about it, which is why I'm sort of keen to hear John's view. I think Peter V'landys, although he's been quite brash and upfront, and I think it maybe even has run a little bit roughshod over this need to put the health of the nation first, has actually come across as somebody who is very listenable, taken every question that's been offered to him, looked for positive solutions wherever he can, given the sense, certainly to those from the outside looking in, that he's very much in charge of Rugby League and where it's going in the NRL. Difficult times, but I do think, very interesting. Who will survive the inevitable cull after all of this?
Yeah, I missed a bit of that, Phil, cut in and out. But I think that the thing with Peter V'landys that's interesting, obviously made his name in horse racing, and he's sort of taken horse racing in New South Wales to, massive heights. He's very good at marketing it, self-promotion. He's very close with News Limited, which is obviously part owner of Fox Sports and a massive, cover of Rugby League and, investor in Rugby League. So he's got a very good relationship there, and I think he's come out of it, as a strong leader, and Todd Greenberg has probably been on the wane for a little bit before this happened, and I think there's significant factions who want him out, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does survive probably the next couple of months or this year. But if Phil Gould becomes the next CEO of the NRL, then that's, I don't want to say God help us, but yeah, that would be an odd decision. I think that the funny thing with the NRL, obviously they've had Dave Smith in there before, who was the banker extraordinaire. I think he actually is Welsh. Wasn't a rugby league guy, and he got sort of torn apart for that. And there's been other, leaders in, like David Gallop was there for quite a while. David Moffat, who was obviously over in England as well. So that there is sort of that self-cannibalization aspect. But yeah, it's a strange time when it comes to leaders, isn't it? Some people want to say, well, you can't criticize any leader because they're doing the best they can, and other people are more like, well, you could have done this and you could have done that. So it's an interesting time.
It was interesting. Putting his head above the parapet last week was Gary Hetherington, who, of course, many would suggest that his hand behind some of the people who ran the Rugby Football League in the past, maybe as their puppet master, was why we've ended up in the situation where Robert Elston runs Super League now, and he's the puppet behind some other people on the other side of the Pennines. But he came out and said, 3 games a week, let's get on with it, lads, blah, 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 blah. Simon Wolford in the paper today, not happy. The Players' Union, they never really say anything. It's going to be an interesting time in terms of how the players react to the situation coming up. There's been no moans from them publicly about whatever's happening with wages and such. I know some clubs have put them on furlough, some haven't announced it publicly. So the players all seem to be united at the moment. I think, first of all, we're not going to get a full season out of this, are we? There's no way we can come back in whenever we are, which, personally, looking at the world, I don't think it's going to be at least until June at the very earliest. We're not going to get a full season in. There's going to be a lot of difficult decisions to make.
I think we probably could get a full season because there will be enough weeks to do it. But that assumption initially is that there won't be a test series at the end of it, which would be a crying shame on any number of reasons. I think also it's not quite as simple as saying midweek games. What are the knock-on effects does that have? I think that means the end of the reserve grade for this year at least, because I just don't think we've got the players. I think if you're really serious to bring in Gary Hetherington's point about the economics, because clubs are on a knife edge, and if they can't get a certain number of home games played, then not only does that affect their match day income, but also there's a refund needed to season ticket holders who've already paid for those games. So from an economic point of view, they will do everything they can to play out as near to a full season as they possibly can. I think from a player welfare point of view and reaction of the players, and obviously scrapping the reserve grades to make sure that squads are big enough to cope, I think, again, probably the most responsible leadership would be if you've got a squad of, let's say, 32 players, most clubs. Obviously, there are some exceptions, one of whom plays in Canada. But you say if you are playing those 3 games in a week, then any player can only play 2 of those games. Then again, you're playing the matches that are needed, creating the revenue, but you're also managing resources properly. And you might have to do that this year, which is going to be very interesting for coaches, because they're going to look at the 3 games and go, well, which do I want my best players to play for, and can I throw some of the kids in, or do I do a balance across all 3 games and maybe run the risk of losing them all? I think all of that is in the melting pot for discussion. But I think more interestingly than this year, because we'll play whatever we can play until we know a date. It's pointless even coming up with, we need to go to a conference system and all that kind of. Where do we go from here? That I think is, John's written a piece about This is a chance to reset the game. I think Tony Smith has come out and said that there's a lot of people who are very deep thinkers about the sport who are saying, let's use this isn't the time to pick out any positives, because clearly there aren't any. But if it gives us the opportunity to look at where we want to be in 3 or 5 years' time, actually, we need to be doing that now. We need to be saying whatever this season is actually taken out of our hands. It's determined by the time we've got available. But what we do from next year with a new television deal in the offing, that is something we can control now.
I'd like to be referred to as a shallow thinker of the sport, Phil.
I thought you dropped off, to be honest.
I think it's an interesting point what you said about, players only being allowed to play, say 2 of, 3 fixtures in a row. I mean, if you're one club, say, that only has 21 players, you can't physically do that, can you? And
no, but I think if you scrap the reserve grade, then a club like that will be able to pick up some other players on loan, or, like we did in the war, we had guest players. You have to make sure that nobody isn't playing. So if you're player number, 29 at a certain club and you're not going to get much game time, you do go and play for another club that needs players.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think you're right. You have to adapt and evolve. Be nimble, be innovative. And, like Brian McDermott's idea, I don't think anything shouldn't be off the table. I think everything should be on the table. Sorry. It's definitely a chance to maybe experiment and see if some new things work. I think working against that, it's kind of a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Because rugby league is quite, used to changing and bringing in new rules and whatever. But then on the other hand, we are quite traditional and parochial as well. So, whether there's the will or the strength to kind of do that, I really don't know. But it could be, we could use this as an opportunity. I think I'd like to think we someone is thinking about that. But yeah, I just don't know if it will happen.
What's interesting, I think, is at the times of the greatest change here, not in Australia, it might be the absolute opposite in Australia, has always been when clubs have got less power. They've been forced into agreeing change and looking at change because economically they've been at their weakest. So in 1973-74, David Oxley came in, the game was absolutely on its knees. And the clubs virtually gave him and David Howes a mandate to do whatever they liked. And the sport moved forward. And the clubs clearly were behind the scenes lobbying in their interest. But if they were told we're having a Regal Trophy, we were having a Regal Trophy. And in the same, in 95, when Super League was discussed, nobody turned round to Maurice Lindsay and said, you can get £87 million, but that means we have to take a little bit of a back seat and accept summer rugby, and we'll talk about mergers. And even clubs like Workington and Whitehaven actually agreed to merge. And it was only when they went back to their fan base that they realised that they were going to be vilified for the rest of their lives if they were seen as the chairman that brought this in. But at times when the clubs are at their economic weakest is when you can actually get change through. And this is one of those times.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just touching on Rich's point before about player power and the unions, that the fact that there isn't a strong union, I mean, what say are players even going to have in a change in structural competition at all? If Gary Hetherington, who's obviously a very powerful and influential figure in the game, he's saying, we'll play through to December or into January. I mean, the next season's supposed to start at the end of January. I mean, what? Even, from a business point of view, that might be the best option. But from, a marketing point of view, from a product point of view, from a player welfare point of view, is that the right call? I don't think it is, personally. What kind of product, if we're just churning out game after game every 3 days, what kind of product are we actually going to be putting out there? It'll only be the diehard supporters, who obviously the three of us would be good at that, but it'll only be those people who are turning up or watching every 2-3 days, and even then your patience is going to be tested, isn't it?
Well, we might have nothing else better to do by the time the season comes back around. I might be able to go watch a game every day, and I might have no other financial interest to get involved with. It's interesting about the teams being filled with guest players. I guess we could go down the I think it's in North American sports when they bring in new teams, they have an expansion draft and teams are allowed to protect 90% of their roster, but then you can have 2 or 3 players who'd be in a pool who could be used by teams if they needed them. Certainly Toronto will need more than 2 or 3 to fill up their squad. Speaking of
Ben
Toronto,
Barber. Ben
Barber.
Where's
Chris Sander? Where are they all? Speaking of Toronto, who haven't yet played a game in Canada and may well not at some point this season, the way things are going at the moment, sadly for them. Stories about big losses potentially for them if they don't go through this season, especially with the ticket money at home. Should we just scrap relegation now, regardless of the fact that Toronto are at the bottom of the table? Should we just scrap relegation now? It's not going to be a fair season.
I think the interesting thing as well is Catalan, because Toronto can play. Clearly, they won't get 10,000 home fans and all the money that brings, but their squad is here. If they had to play all of their games over here, logistically, they can do it. The issue for me is how are Catalan going to move around at the moment, getting in and out of France through quarantine regulations, lockdowns, all that kind of thing. And they're already 3 games behind. So I think that is probably more of a logistical issue than the Wolfpack. For me, as you know, I'm not a huge fan of promotion relegation anyway. I think this is the start of actually saying, if we are going to return to something along the lines of a franchise-based system, which doesn't preclude promotion relegation, it's just not all about what you do on the field, that's only a part of it, then we could start doing that now. And I think there is a business case for saying that we actually need to be doing that now. And one of the things we could perhaps be announcing is that now isn't going to apply this year. Now, whether that is 13 teams in Super League next year, maybe 14 teams in Super League next year, again, there's an economic ramification for that. Because that means that all the other clubs that are hanging on to survive get less money next season. But from people talk about the integrity of the competition. It's a word that's been used a lot. To me, there is no integrity this year if you have relegation, unless you start the competition again and rule out the matches that have been played and play Super League Mark II in 2020.
I think that's what I said on the final show before we had the lockdown was, just end the season now. That was 2020 season A. And when we know how long we've got and how many games we can fit in, start season B and just have another season, if you will, building up to a grand final or whatever we're going to do. How do you see things going forward, John? Obviously, Toronto, you're big fans of you at the club.
Well, they are losing $1 billion this year, aren't they? Or is it 10 billion or 100? I don't know. It's some sort of astronomical loss.
How do they do that?
I don't know. If David Argyle spent 20 million or upwards of 20 million in 3.5 years, I don't know how they lose 10 million this year. But I'm not an economist. No, I think it's a real hard one keeping promotion relegation if you don't play out the full season. The weird thing is, though, this break, and I was speaking to Ryan Brearley the other day, and he actually made this point, and it's quite true. I mean, they had 10 to 15 injuries, so 3 months off might actually help them come back.
No, it's true.
And it might help. It might help Toronto as well because they obviously had quite a few, injuries to a very small squad. So it might, I mean, obviously it helps in some ways. Those players will get back to full health, but then they're all going to need basically another mini preseason. It's not like the lockdown can end tomorrow and they can all just go and play a game of rugby league. I mean, I had a chat to Josh Drinkwater in Catalans the other week, and he was saying, you can keep fit, but your body's not used to those collisions that you have, in training and that contact, and that doesn't come back, overnight. So, excuse me, it's a really tricky one because then you've got the clubs in the championship, like, for example, Lee, spending a lot of money, and you just say, well, you can't come up this year, or Toulouse. It's a minefield, really, promotion relegation. And I think I'm sort of on the similar thinking to Phil. I don't think promotion relegation kind of works with a salary cap system. Because the whole point, if you look at it in football, clubs, just spend effectively as much as they want to try and get promoted. When you've capped that spending, and also when you've only got 3, 4, whatever, a handful of clubs who can actually afford to go up into Super League, like, when Batley a couple of years ago just said, well, even if we got promoted, we wouldn't want to do it. And you had Featherstone saying, oh, we'd still keep part-time players, which is kind of just lunacy in a full-time professional division. It doesn't really work. But on the flip side of that is it's part of British sporting identity. So I don't know if enough fans would want it to go. I just don't know if there's enough people to say, look, we like promotion and relegation. It's the fairy tale of English sport, and they do it in football, but rugby league's not football, is it? So
it's not. It's not. And I think they'll be beating it off in Rugby Union soon enough anyway, won't they? As soon as Saracens get back up, they can just close the door on the Premiership. Interesting, Sale have got a women's team now in the Rugby Union women's top flight, so look forward to all their signings coming from the Castleford women as their players are forced to retire from Rugby League and go to Rugby Union. Of course, it's difficult to retire from something you're not getting paid for, but there you
go. You mentioned the women's game. I hope that isn't going to be a casualty of all this, because certainly in the NRL it looks like it is, that the Roosters and Warriors, because of all the cash cuts that they've had to bring in, have basically said our women's team is on hold at the moment, as there are only 4 women's teams playing in their competition. That effectively ends it this year. I think over here again, we haven't played any games yet, and whilst the players themselves aren't paid, will the clubs have the ability to stage these games without dipping into a cost structure that they just don't have anymore? I hope again, when we look at the bigger picture, we have to identify parts of the sport that will appeal. Not only to broad, how do we fill the gap with Sky if we can't play all the men's Super League games? We offer them women's Super League games, I would have said. So we got to be very careful that we don't just leave it to clubs to say, cut out PDRL, LDRL, Women's Rugby League, anything that isn't the men's first team, because you've only got a limited amount of money. I think we've got to be smarter than that.
It would be great to see the Forty20 TV logo on Sky Sports at some point this season. That'd be very good. Right, see if we can swing that.
With the Sky deal, though, I mean, surely they've got a set number of games that they've got to show, and they only show 3 a week. So, surely they could say, well, we can show every game, every round for the rest of a shortened season, whether it be, a 15-week season, a 20-week season, whatever.
My only worry with that goes back to the fact that every other sport will be vying for that schedule, and if they've got finishing off the Premier League and the EFL, they're not going to be able to show 6 games a week because they physically will not have the capacity to do it.
That's right. I suppose if could be a boom time if you're a cameraman or you're someone, you could be a multi-millionaire in the space of a couple of weeks of work.
Sadly, judging by my work on the programme, usually on a Monday, I don't think I'll be getting a call from Sky to film anything on my mobile phone. So I could do with the work at the moment.
But you will be working for our league, Rich. You will be working there, definitely.
Mind you, some of the people they've used in the past, there's always a chance. We mentioned the Women's Super League there, which hopefully will come back in some form this year. And obviously we had the new exciting format for that ready, and we don't know what will happen with that. I'm waiting to read Danica's column in the next 4020 magazine, because she did ask me if she needed to write something, and I said, yes, you do. So I look forward to that. Probably tales of TikTok more than anything else, which is the new cultural phenomenon among rugby league players, and Sandy, of course.
Sadly for young people, so that rules me out.
Here's a question for you, boys. Should Super League or the RFL actually invest in TikTok, considering how many players and fans seem to be producing endless content? Some of it quite funny and good, a lot of it absolutely shite. Should they invest in it and try and make some money out of it, because it does seem to be growing day by day. I recommend Peter Matautia and George Griffin at Castleford and Josh Adokar at the Melbourne Storm. Very good.
George Griffin's looking to be the next James Bond, I reckon.
Sky Sports News are desperate for content, so the more stuff we can push to them to fill time, if it's players prattling around on TikTok or doing training routines, which seem to be popular at the moment as well, the better. I actually wrote about this in the next magazine, if it makes the cut, about going back to those finals they shown on the BBC at the weekend, Robbie Paul, and in that area you had young, attractive players who you would market as such to an audience. Now, whether it worked or not, I don't know, but we've said a million times on this programme, we don't do enough to market the players, and this is a way they are doing it themselves, and we need to give them that extra push as well.
I think the interesting thing about TikTok is not that you can necessarily invest in it. I think we just need to put more content on it as a sport. And one of the things that we will need to look at is how do we generate additional interest? And if that is through social media channels that we don't really exploit at the moment, then that's what we've got to do. It is all very well going down the conventional route, but less and less people are watching it or using it. We've got a plethora of podcasts at the moment. And some of them, that is how people want to consume their sport. It needs to be punchy and short and interesting and maybe a bit, off the wall as well. But if we don't recognise that it isn't about just putting Inside Super League on Sky, then we again are missing the opportunity that we could actually be looking a lot more modern than we currently are.
I've been brainstorming. I think one idea could be Super League Love Island. You get 6 Super League players, put them on an island with 6 models, maybe 50 cartons of Fosters, and then let hilarity ensue. No, I'm not. I'm only joking.
That's what the NRL are thinking of doing if they quarantine everybody.
Isn't this a party at Kyle Walker's house?
Phil, that's called the off season in the NRL, and that usually happens in Bali or in America these days.
Right.
But, yeah, we don't probably want to go the Kyle Walker sex party route if we can avoid that.
But yeah, I think we need to be a lot more aware of what younger people are consuming at the moment and on what mediums they are doing. And if it is a TikTok or a 10-minute podcast, then that probably is more valuable than great tries from the 1970s that only people like me can remember. 15-second
clips of players scoring tries with music in the background, which is the whole thing that TikTok is, might work. It might not, but it doesn't take long to do them.
Tina Turner in Super League. Let's do it.
Yeah. All those popular songs that they all listen to, all the kids, they all like that stuff on the TikTok.
I was going to ask a question if this format allows one to do so. I look back at the Challenge Cup finals, seeing literally 100,000 people at Wembley not that long ago. Yeah, I know we're talking sort of mid-80s, but in the ultimate scheme of things, that's not that long. A lot has changed, but huge crowds, very colourful. We saw the first game of Super League replayed, which was 18,000 in Paris. I know a lot of free tickets were given away, but Eddie Hemmings, as somebody may have pointed out in their column in the Next 40 magazine, couldn't help but keep alluding to how many were in the ground. I think what we forget is that Paris then played their first away game the following Thursday, and there were nearly 10,000 people at London. And you just wonder, and again, you look at the riches that the NRL have accrued in the relatively recent past. Has the sport been complacent? Have we just sat there and said, We've got more money in the bank than we've ever had. We've got quite a lot of people watching the game. We don't need to look at anything or change anything or worry about anything because we're doing all right. And is that where you're most vulnerable? Because to use a footballing analogy, the old, when Liverpool were great, they went out and bought players and they didn't need them. They were just making a great team even greater. And if somebody came on the market, they bought them. They didn't necessarily think, what position do they play in? It's like it will enhance the organisation if we keep buying the best players. Wigan did it when they were the only full-time team. But have we as a sport, Rugby League, not putting the blame on any single person's shoulders, did we get to a point where the people and the riches were there and we just thought they'd always be there?
Yes, is the short answer. Yeah, I think just on that, Phil. I mean, I think Sheffield had used to get crowds of 7,000 one season in Super League in the I think it might have been in the 90s. Now they get 500 at Doncaster. You look at what's happened in the NRL, and they've got a TV deal that's worth essentially about £1 billion. I mean, how they can almost be broke in a matter of weeks is just crazy. It's just insane. I mean, I know the salary caps are massive, and player wages and players deserve to get paid good money because it's a short career and the impact on their bodies is for the rest of their lives. But how that the clubs are managing to get 13, 15 million, whatever it is a year, and how that money has been squandered so quickly is obscene.
What did we actually invest in all these riches? Because our clubs are now stronger on both sides of the world. Our players, again, have immediately gone into furlough, and they're players who, at the end of their careers, still have to go and get jobs. They don't get paid the same sort of level that some do in other sports. What did we spend the money on? A couple of clubs have got new stadia, which is great. But you just worry at times like this because you don't think about it at the time that it's happening. Did anybody sit down and say, we're accruing wealth. What is our aim? What do we want to do with it? How do we want to create some kind of a lasting legacy with it? Because, even over here, how long have we talked about we haven't had our own national stadium? But for the last 25 years, more money has come into Rugby League than ever before. And we still don't have our own national stadium. We don't have an asset, which is, hindsight is a wonderful thing. But is this another salutary lesson that all of the money can't immediately go out of the game?
Well, I don't want to have another plug, but on a end of 2019 edition of By the Balls, Brian Carney did suggest about a potential reduction of the salary cap ahead of the next TV, which at the moment, right now, looks pretty likely. And I don't think you would necessarily say that players in England are overpaid, but you can only be paid what the market kind of decides what the value is, and what is the value when the crowds are either not growing or they're stagnant, or in the championship they might only be 2,500 average per game, and in League One, not even 700.
But that comes down to another very pertinent question: that do you need a salary cap? Are you not a halfway house if you have a salary cap but you don't have an element of franchising? Is that not a license to say, clubs, will be regulated on what they spend, but actually what is being spent in some clubs is beyond what they can afford? I don't know. I just think this really has opened the eyes of a lot of people about where we are. We could be going back to a predominantly part-time sport, and you would say after 25 years of pumping so much money into it, there's been a huge amount of wastage there somewhere.
Yeah,
you'd imagine there'd be clubs at the moment who don't have high overheads or higher overheads than compared to some of their rival companies in the same division, who'll be thinking now, when we do come back, why are we employing people to do things that we don't necessarily need them to do? And there might be a lot of pain to come for not just on the field matters, but off the field as well, across not just Super League, but the sport in general. And I think everyone's in the same boat, pretty much, apart from the very, very high paid in any industry at the moment. Everyone, apart from the most important people in the country now, who 6 months ago were scum on the bottom of someone's shoe, but now care workers and people who work in supermarkets are important.
Nobody said they're going to give them a pay rise, though, have they?
Well, no, that's to discuss afterwards. We can do the clapping. That's important. We clap, and it's important that our politicians try and get footballers to cut their wages, which I don't know why politicians do that, other than to distract from the fact that they haven't got the necessary equipment for those doctors and nurses and carers on the front line to actually do their job properly and safely. But we can distract people by talking about Wayne Rooney's wages or whatever. But there's going to be a lot of pain coming in the next few months, potentially going forward, and it's going to affect everyone. And I think everyone has to be mindful of that when things do return and we're out of lockdown, that things aren't going to be the same. Like you said, John, there's going to be a new normal coming up, and I don't think any of us know exactly what that's going to entail.
So here's another one to throw into the pot, of which there is no answer. And I think one of the things we have to be wary of is, at this time, there are a lot of questions, but there are no golden answers. How vulnerable is Rugby League to some kind of a takeover or merger from Rugby Union? Bearing in mind that obviously the ARU is on its uppers. The American Rugby Union has just filed for bankruptcy. But CVC, who are merchant bankers, have just invested a huge amount of money into Rugby Union and are sniffing around possibly even the NRL. What's to say that the Rupert Murdochs of this world look at the two codes of rugby and say, you are both at virtual rock bottom in terms of finance. We want to come up with the best of the two of you. Will that likely be on the table, do you think?
I don't think that's possible. I don't think there'd be enough support really for that to get over the line, and you drive a lot of traditionalists from both codes away. I quite like both codes and have played both codes and reported on both codes, but I think things are too far down the line in terms of history and what's gone on in the past for that to happen. But it is, as you said, Phil, an interesting scenario when you have, the American Rugby Union, and obviously, North America is painted to be the future for all sports, and where money grows on trees and et cetera. It's not that easy, and the Rugby Union's already had one professional competition, go under there. It's not that easy to succeed and thrive in North America, and football found that even when they had Pele and Beckenbauer playing in the 70s. So yeah, in terms of the Australian Rugby Union, I think that they've asked for a handout from the whatever they're called these days, World Rugby, and they've got a lot of high support from corporates in Australia. So I don't think we're going to see a merger of the codes, but we're definitely going to see in both codes, across the whole sport, rationalisation and reductions in wages, in staff, in jobs. Maybe in matches, maybe everything. I don't know if we're going to go back to semi-amateur, but there may be some competitions, and I think Super Rugby's one in Australia that's been struggling for a while, and it could go back to being just a provincial competition in Australia and a conventional one in New Zealand, and one in South Africa. I guess anything's really up for grabs, isn't it? Because we don't economically, the impact could be felt for years or even decades.
Mm.
Too many questions, no answers.
No answers.
Although I am thinking more and more likely that the Sheffield Eagles may be the only ever winners of the 1895 Cup. We've got to fit that in as well, with the amateur teams that have been shoehorned in for the teams who can't be bothered to play in that year. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with the Challenge Cup. Gary Hetherington said we'll play the 6th round behind closed doors, and maybe those will be the warm-up games for the resumption of the regular leagues. And we've got a Challenge Cup final to fit in at some point. We've got the added complication of next year. There's the everything is up in the air. Although the one thing we do know is that everything from this point forward should be building up to the first game of the 2021 Rugby League World Cup.
Well, I think there was a conference call with John Dutton, who I think is another leader who's emerged with even more credit during this period, and the way he's gone about talking about the World Cup. The problem the World Cup have got, which to his credit he's not seen as a problem, is that 2021 was theirs. That window of opportunity was the big event, is the Rugby League World Cup, and now virtually everything is being played in 2021, including the Olympics, and probably have 2 lots of Wimbledon now. Rather than sit there and say, yeah, we're in danger of being swamped and we've revised our ticket sales down. He's saying, no, we'll be part of this wave of fantastic sport, and we can't wait to make our contribution. But I think you're right. We know that first game. We know who's playing in it. We know where it's going to be played. The date is not going to change, because I think John was asked, have you considered putting your events back to 2022? And he said, no, absolutely not. But the only way you can do that is if you prioritise international rugby league ahead of club rugby league in both hemispheres. And the danger is that if the Ashes tour doesn't go ahead, international, and the Oceania games, first ones have already been cancelled, international rugby league drops down the pecking order, which is why I just wondered whether some kind of amalgam with rugby union where the international game is king and generates all of the income for the club game, either is a model we need to think about following, or we get swept up as part of.
I'm trying to imagine this hybrid code, which is just going to be rugby union with the word union.
Well, it wouldn't, because on the field it would have to be rugby league. Because I think the one thing rugby union realise is that they haven't got a product at the moment, and that to make their product what it needs to be, they need to have 13 players. So they may as well play rugby league. But it then becomes, if that was to be agreed, was it French Rugby Union, which is the one that's got all the money in the Northern Hemisphere, is thinking about moving to the summer? Well, again, if that does, the distinctions between the sports, apart from their history, which Maurice Lindsay very famously said doesn't pay the bills, actually brings them closer together.
Money from the Nazis, though, does pay the bills. As the French
hidden paintings in the basement of the French
Swiss gold.
Yeah, sort of get them in there. There's that train hidden under a mountain. That's a little. Well, I don't know. I didn't really study history. So, kind of like we were the forefront of the negative rugby league revolution. We're criticised as such, but it's hard to be not necessarily positive, but it's going to be an interesting time whenever we come back, and hopefully we don't rush back. I know we all want to make money again, but we can't rush back for reasons of obviousness out there. And hopefully that everyone that is listening to this program is staying safe and doing what you're told, as opposed to the Scottish Chief Medical Officer. I mean, here's one of the sad knock-on effects is Mossy Massoy and all his new friends in Pinderfield who are getting turfed out because they need the ward space, and hopefully his rehabilitation and those of the people who's been living alongside for the last few months continues well. And his rehabilitation is one of the positive things coming out of a negative this year. What we just want is everyone to be safe and back watching rugby league as soon as is possible.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be some issues further along the line about Liverpool playing Real Madrid at a time when clearly the virus...
Atletico.
Was it Atletico?
Yep.
Was clearly an issue at the time. And I'm hoping that, obviously, and we'll never know, that having people at the Jungle, the Sunday after that, there was no infection passed around needlessly. So I think you're right. We have to have clinically sterile conditions where if you're going to invite large crowds back into sporting events, they have to be safe. And that's why I wouldn't be surprised if we do start off behind closed doors. And that's where I think Gary Hetherington's right, that almost the Challenge Cup is cost neutral for clubs because it's not included in your season ticket. So you can do something to relaunch the game with maybe a weekend of those 6-round ties, all played behind closed doors, maybe in the same location. I don't know, 2 Sundays and 3 others, but you get that feeling for sport back, and actually economically you don't really lose anything if they're Challenge Cup ties, and you can offer something to television. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is how we start. There'll have to be a balance because suddenly these restrictions are not going to be lifted. It'll be you can go out, but you can't have gatherings of more than 500, and then it'll go up to 1,000, and then maybe it'll be 3,000. But I think it will be a phased. I can't see suddenly 20,000 people being allowed in the DW Stadium or at Headingley or wherever, KCOM for Andy Last's first game in charge, which everybody will want to be at. Straight off the bat, there's got to be a phasing.
If only Lee Radford had hung on another couple of days, he could have had more money. Well, furloughed anyway from Hull. John, as we wind up, give us something positive. Give us something positive to think about going forward as we head into these uncertain times, as we like to say.
There's lots of good stuff on Netflix, so yeah, enjoy that.
You've been watching that Tiger thing everyone's talking about, haven't you?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start that tonight, Rich. I've been getting through a few other shows, but yeah, it's supposed to be good. No, on a serious note, I think if you're a lover of the sport, I mean, obviously there's been a lot of classic games showed on the BBC and on Sky, in the NRL and the Watch NRL app. So there's a lot of, I guess, celebration of the past and history, and there's lots of good books, which I'm sure Phil can plug a lot better than me. But a chance to, I guess, reflect and look back at some great moments of the past and of the history. And there's a lot of good stuff there that we probably don't take stock of and appreciate. I know I probably don't as much as I should. You're always sort of looking to the next game, aren't you? The next fixture, and the next great player that you see, and you kind of forget about the one that 20 years ago was maybe twice as good, but with the passing of time loses that impact. So I think the game will survive. There's no doubt about that. The sport will survive. We will be playing games this year, I'm sure. But we just need to stay indoors, stay healthy, and get through this, and we will. Not to sound like some sort of poor man's Queen Elizabeth.
I nearly stood up and saluted then when I heard you say that.
Do you want me to say it in a German accent? Would that help?
That was the one positive thing about the BBC repeating the Water Splash documentary yesterday. There's a lot of people who didn't see it the first time because obviously it was on a Saturday afternoon, and it was on a Sunday afternoon this time in the middle of a time when there's nothing else to do. A lot of people saw that for the first time, saw that story, and the one thing that comes out of it is of why they went and interviewed Don Fox back at Wembley 20 odd years later is beyond me, because you could tell he was a broken man, and it's a sad end to the story. But the positive end of that story is the fact that when Wakefield returned to the city as the runners-up, or some would say losers of that final, no one was there. Well, I can't say no, because there's always idiots, aren't they? But the vast majority of people were there to show support for Don Fox, and I'm not necessarily sure if the same thing happened today in the world we live in with social media and whatever. If someone did miss a goal kick in the last minute of the Challenge Cup final to win it, I don't think they'd get that same kind of support, sadly.
No, but I think that's
hope...
a good example, Rich, because I knew, until that was on last year, I knew absolutely nothing about that game. Watched that documentary and was just blown away. It was so well made, the emotion of the
brilliant
story. It's just fantastic, and that's the sort of thing. If you're a rugby league fan, obviously I am, but knew nothing about it, and was so impressed with the whole thing. So yes, things like that you can discover in this period is important.
I think Sky repeated the final in the 90s when they used to show old sports stuff to fill time. So I obviously saw it a long time after it happened. The people, they're never going to get over it here. They're never going to get over it. Those Leeds players celebrating in free. It's disgraceful.
Beverisman went and helped Don Fox up.
Yeah, but all the other ones jumping and hollering and shouting. Typical Leeds.
They just won £50. It meant a lot. I hope the main thing that comes out of this actually is a bit of a societal change. So I think it was getting to the point where even in rugby league, where we sort of like to play the family card, that we were getting very divisive. We were blaming referees a lot. We were, vilifying players on social media. I hope the fact that we might have realised what we had and what we still want and what we've missed will change attitudes. I think that's incredibly idealistic to say something like that. But I just hope we behave a bit more like a family rather than say we're a family after this, because you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
John, and I know that Phil's right, but we all know what's going to happen as soon as any referee makes a decision that some of the crowd disagree with, we'll all be back to normal. But at least this year, we don't have articles saying us that Sky were disgraced for not showing Saints on Wigan on Good Friday or whatever it was. I can't remember.
Yeah, the Manson family. I think it'd have to go to the story the Gary Hetherington story from the other week, and looked on Facebook, and one of the comments was, "What a penis." I think that sort of typifies the discourse that we have in 2020 when it comes to online comments.
Toleration has kicked in then. That's good.
Yes, yeah, and the people criticising Robert Elston for talking about Super League clubs and them saying, what about the other clubs, even though he's the CEO of Super League, not the RFL. Unfortunately, there's not been an intellect injection with a lot of people during this crisis.
I hope we view all this with two different sets of eyes. One, what do we need to do to get back on the field and generate some income to keep all the clubs going? And two, do we use this as a moment to genuinely move the sport forward, which will include the NRL and the RFL working closer together and actually deciding what we want from the sport and moving towards it, because this is a potential for long-term change.
I'd just add to that what Phil said. Yeah, if we could have more collaboration, less division, not only within each competition but within the hemispheres as well, that would be a great result, wouldn't it?
John, thanks for your time. Where can we find you at the minute? Because obviously the media world is fragmented and half closed down and half open. What are you doing at the moment, and where can we find it?
I'm inside. I'm in my house. I'm not trying to. No, you can find me on Twitter at Johnny D Davidson, and obviously on another podcast called By the Balls, and on Patreon at rugbyleaguehub.com long reads. Still pumping out quite a few rugby league stories. Also in the new issue of Forty20 magazine. I'm working on a piece of the issue after that. So yeah, lots of stuff to come, luckily.
We're so belligerent that we're carrying on regardless.
Yeah, the new magazine will be out, in a couple of weeks? I'm sure we'll do something again before then.
Oh, yeah, we go to print this weekend. So you'll have plenty to read, some long reads in there, middle of the week after.
Yeah, next month's Rugby League on TV column, I think at the moment, is an episode of Sporting Triangles with Joe Lydon on. Pronounced by the continuity announcer as Joe Lydon, brilliantly, who was on Emlyn Hughes' team after he defected from Question of Sport. But that will mean nothing at all to John, so he can look forward to reading that in the whatever month, because I don't even know what day it is, let alone month. John, Phil, thank you very much for your time. We will do some more of these at some point if this works, which I think it has. There were some more old things going up when I sort them out. I've got some old Christmas specials looking back at our time at Radio Yorkshire, including a 2-hour special of Leeds Rhinos winning the treble, which I'm sure will go down really well with all of our audience.
Yeah, they can't wait for this in Wakefield.
Oh, yes. I'll be putting that one up about midnight on a Wednesday, I think. But,
which is when we'll be playing games when we come back.
Oh, can't wait. Perfect. Us and Belarusian football will be the only things going for the rest of the year. I never knew how much I love Dynamo Minsk. John, Phil, thanks for your time. Thanks for listening wherever you have been. Stay in contact with us on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We haven't got a TikTok yet, but we'll do eventually. That was an emergency edition of 4020, not quite live.